hello. Welcome again. It's two Creative Fire JB. I got an awesome guest this week. We're going to hit some very detailed stuff. We know that elections coming up. We know so much is happening in the state of Delaware. We're excited about it. We're excited to hear everybody's platform, what's going to happen, where we're going. And I have the awesome experience to have Miss Ruth Briggs-King this week, running for Lieutenant Governor, state of Delaware. She's right there. She's going to give you a little introduction about herself. She's going to let you know where she came, why she picked this realm of politics, and what else we got to offer. But I'm not going to hold her up. Just give our audience a little bit about yourself, and then we'll just get into it.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be with you tonight, and for viewers letting me into their homes. You're actually in my home this evening. I'm running for Lieutenant Governor here in Delaware. And before I go any further, I have to tell you that meeting Johnnie is just such a positive energy and a good vibe that you get when you meet him. And I don't know if it comes to the screen or not, but the spirit and the positivity is just overwhelming. So I think this is going to be an enjoyable encounter. I have been fortunate to serve in your Delaware legislature for 14 years, representing Georgetown, Millsboro, and areas in between. And I'm not the usual kind of legislator in that I don't really go in for a lot of titles and stuff like that. I just want to get some things done that help the people. And that's sort of my reputation that I've been. I've been fortunate enough to have worked and served in each county in the state. And for those of you that are in Kent County, I was an educator at Kent Votech, which became Polytech High School, where I taught allied health professions, and then later was a district coordinator for all those fun student activities and things like graduation and honor society. And then when I left there, I went on to run MedLab and LabCorp as the regional manager for Delaware and parts of Pennsylvania. So those of you on upstate into the PA area, and enjoyed that, and was doing a lot with human resources at the same time. Came back because I had an aging parent that needed more attention from me, and I couldn't give that to them from a distance, and focused on working in Sussex County in banking and finance. And what did I know about finance? A lot, but I knew human resources. But that's where I learned that how important understanding financing and understanding financial literacy, nothing will improve your quality of life more than understanding where your money comes from, how to save and how to invest, not just save, but invest for the future through a lot of different products. So I was doing a lot of volunteering with not-for-profits. Somebody came to me and said, you know, you should really consider running for office. And honestly, I had been in the legislature and I was watching a couple of folks and I thought, I can do this, or I think I can do a little bit better. So I was elected in 2009 and served until November of last year. Two governors appointed me to some financial task force, so they must have thought I understood a little about where the taxpayers' money goes and how the state spends it. And opportunity came up. People were saying to me, we need you, because I had resigned from the House. I moved a mile out of the district, still live in Georgetown, but I was a mile over the line. And I said, why not? I wanted to rest for a spell, but people were calling me, we need you, we need you. Both sides of the aisle, you know, Newcastle County, Sussex County. And so I said, why not? And I knew going into it, it was a long shot because I was getting into the race late. I didn't really get in until June. The opponents had been into it for almost a year. I don't like asking for money. I like to sort of have my friend. I like people to give me the money that I need, but I'm not good at bothering people for money for something that seems like it's for me. I'll ask for money for you for a cause or for a purpose. But anyway, we're doing very well because I think we're connecting with the people and they like that I'm straightforward, direct, and honest. I've served on several important committees in addition to joint finance, education, health and social services, transportation, land use, public safety, judiciary, and most importantly, veterans affairs as well. So very well-rounded individual, but always looking to improve the lives and the livelihoods of the people, and remembering it's the people we serve, not special interest groups, not special PACs, wherever that money comes from, but putting people first. Is that enough or too much?
That is awesome and stuff. And
Okay.
it's amazing. I mean, I know it had to be for you to jump into this political realm. What really, I mean, seeing so many circumstances in Delaware, so many things happening.
I think what would frustrate me is, I'm a Republican and I've been a member of the minority, and seeing things that we need desperately in this state and not getting the action on them. It seems like we've had some of the same people in control for a long time, and they talk, but they just don't walk. I don't see the things, and I didn't see the action. So I can't sit back and watch our schools be some of the best funded and our performance be so low, or that kids don't get to choose if they want to go to a vocational or a career technical school. In Sussex County, they accept 200 a year and they have 800 apply. Well, somebody's not getting what they want. And that's, I think, a little consistent with Kent County. Not so bad in Newcastle because they have 4 career technical schools. And we have one in Kent and one in Sussex. So now you start to see the disparity and the difference in some of the things. Equity and education, big issue for me. Your education should not depend on your zip code. And a lot of things have. And so education, then another one for me is access to health care. And when we get below the canal, we only have a couple of hospitals. You have Bay Health, BB, and another one. And so making sure we're building what we need so people get access to a doctor or a specialist when and where they need it. I waited last year from December to May to have a surgical procedure, because the doctor was only allowed 2 days a month in a robotic lab. So that's my experience. I'm sure other people have to wait as well for doctor's appointments, long time for doctor's appointments. So that's another thing on my bucket list to do. And then I think another thing, would be very important to your listeners is when we're talking about education, the absenteeism in any Delaware school on any given day. 20% of the students are absent. So it's worse in the city. In Wilmington, it's 25%. So that means they don't get breakfast or lunch. If they need that extra help, they don't have it at home. It means they don't get other services. It means they're not in the classroom. And the more time they miss out of the classroom, they come further behind. And then what happens? They eventually, many of them will drop out. And we see that tendency. So let's have an honest discussion. Why aren't kids in school? Are they doing daycare for a sibling, helping care for another adult, or maybe there's some other things going on in the school related to group violence or other stuff, and they don't feel safe or they feel intimidated in school? We're not going to know if we don't ask the questions, but I know we can do better. And our kids' performance will come up when they're in the classroom to learn.
Right. And that's so important. Wow. Our kids are
and
our
listen,
priority.
Let's talk about teaching financial literacy in school. So these kids understand before they get their credit card what debt is. Let's start them off. That was one of the first bills I ran years ago. I had to have a task force and change the state standards to include some financial literacy, because it wasn't a requirement until I had to make it so in about 2012. So, and you teach creative financing. You know how important that is.
So important to have that. And just tell us the biggest thing you see. Hi, Miss Isabel and Chuck. What is the biggest thing we see in our schools? Why do we think we're suffering in our school population now? Is it just because of shortage of teachers, or what is it?
I think we know there's a shortage of teachers, but I think it comes back to some kind of lack of accountability. I realize that many households, both parents are working. They're working 2 jobs because the economy in Delaware is not the best. I mean, we have a negative GDP. Our families are struggling. And I don't care if it's a 1-parent family, 2-parent family. Many of our families are struggling. The parents are working, 1 or 2 jobs, and the children are sort of, left to their own to do their homework or maybe take over adult roles in the house. And so I think that there's sometimes not the focus on education there. They're so worried about other things that an adult would be worried about. I think that's one thing. I think the other is the lack of accountability. We have this thing in school now where they won't fail any student, and they will promote them to the next grade, even though they may not be ready for that. Well, I can't imagine sitting in a class and feeling even further behind than I was. And so those are some of the things that we need to help. Instead of just social promote, we need to promote that child when they're ready to move on to the next level. I just think we should rethink a lot about education, having been in that classroom, and make it more real for today. I just think some things we're still trying to do the same thing they did years ago. And a student that gets where they want to be will put a little bit more effort into learning. And I just think a lot of students aren't where they want to be in the classroom. That's just Ruth 101.
Probably been, and we probably for a while that is really coming out. The children anymore, they got to be the babysitters out here for the younger sisters and brothers and parents. And that's happening with our kids. And you mentioned something major about the absenteeism, not able to eat breakfast or have that meal and stuff like that for it. And we know that's a big problem. Tell us about this housing situation that we did.
And it's bad all over the state. It's not just, if I say come to Georgetown, and actually about 3 years ago, when Eugene Young had just taken over the housing authority, and I sit at a lot of meetings and I've been championing this issue. We need affordable and workforce housing. And every year, how many units do we have? How many people are on the waiting list? And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And so I had Eugene come down to Georgetown. I said, you're used to seeing things in the city of Wilmington and on your drive to Dover. I'm telling you from Dover below, the housing and the issues are greater. And he came to Georgetown on one visit, and the second he said, Representative, you're correct. And I said, then we have to do something to provide some equity down here. And we worked together and got more money funded in last year's budget. The problem is, Johnny, we can't build fast enough. We can't build new units for people to live. So I see it as a three-pronged problem that I've worked in different areas. So one that we know, we see it, you see it on the street corners everywhere, homelessness. And is the homelessness because they can't afford or find a rental, or is the homelessness because there's an underlying condition? Maybe it's addiction, maybe it's another mental health illness. So in my opinion, we have three separate issues. We have those that are dealing with maybe they need a transitional houses because they've been in a domestic violence situation and they need temporary housing for them and their family. They've got to get to a safe place. Maybe they have a dependency or a mental health issue. And then we have the third that they can't find a place they can afford. I mean, some of the rental down here, a one-bedroom rental in Georgetown can be almost $1,000 a month. And if you move closer to the beach where your job might be, good luck. It's even more than that. So for people that are living in shelters, and by the way, I volunteer and serve on the Sussex County Community Crisis House, which is a transition and crisis house where we take veterans, domestic violence, and whatever the state sends us that needs a bed, we try and take that. When they're ready to leave us, that we have them stable, maybe they have a job or they've gone through some addiction counseling, there's nowhere to go. So they stay in the shelter longer, which means somebody on the street can't get in the shelter. So it's a three-prong issue. They put up the Hope Hotel, which I have visited in Newcastle County. I've talked with my colleague, Eric Buxton in Dover, who would like to take the family court and do something similar in Dover. And then I myself had tried to get a vacant hotel in Seaford to do that very kind of staged, if you will, where you come in and there's some services that maybe stabilize you. And it's more like a dormitory style. And then maybe there are rooms allocated for families. I will tell you, for your listeners, it is distressing when a mom becomes homeless, because if she has a 13-year-old son The shelters won't take her. They'll take her. She has a 13-year-old daughter, but they don't allow young adolescent men into some of the shelters. So what's that mom supposed to do? Separate her family,
Right.
stay in her car, or couch surf? So those are some of the things I hope to work on. And by talking about them, and when you hear it and your listeners hear it, they'll say, "Well, I had no idea."
Right.
You're right.
Right. It's a horrible situation.
It
And
is. We could put up in Georgetown. There's a business that run and it's building those tiny houses. There's production small tiny houses, and just think if we started a village with tiny houses, and it could be for those in transition. But I think when we sit down, and so I'll give you an example. In Sussex County, I've done a lot of work with Habitat for Humanity. I told you I'm on the Crisis House board. And I also do a lot of work with First State Community Action Agency. Give a shout out to Bernice Edwards, and they do awesome work statewide now. And so we were in a conundrum. Crisis House wanted to expand, and the town said you can't put up a multi apartment kind of complex like you want. You're not zoned for that. You're zoned for single housing. And then Kevin with Habitat, who is single housing for families, they told him he couldn't use his land because it was zoned for something different. So I said, what do you say we swap? So the Crisis House sold some of its property to Habitat. There's now 5 new homes on that parcel in Kimmytown in Georgetown. The Crisis House got money to expand their operations. And that's when Bernice realized her commercial, the plot she had, could be used to place the pallet shelters that are in Georgetown. So there was no regulation required for that. There was no asking for money. It was just bringing stakeholders to the table saying, what can we do collaboratively to address our own issues? And I love when I bring people to the table and we come up with, from the ground up, not the top down, here's what we can do. And, in a year and a half, it's made huge difference.
right. And let's talk about our veterans.
Oh, yes.
Our veterans in need, some of the benefits, some of the things you might see that options are in need of today within our community.
Well, I have been fortunate to serve on the Veterans Committee for a number of years. And a couple of times I was selected to go to national meetings to hear what other places were doing, even in California, about what to do for veterans. In my district, I had Post 28, which was one of the 3rd largest in the nation. It might be between 3rd and 4th now. So we have a challenge because we have not only a Dover Air Force Base with a lot of retirees that stem around the Air Force Base, but we also have a very attractive, retirement tax structure. So a lot of our veterans come here to retire and some return home. And we got a Veterans Services Center located in Georgetown. It's probably been about 8 years ago now. We need it to be big. It's simply not big enough because some things you still have to go all the way up to Ellesmere or some other trip.
Right.
And that's a hike from Sussex County or from Dover up to Ellesmere and back. So we need to look at those services. The second thing I've been extremely frustrated with is the Delaware Veterans Home in Milford. And it's not operating at capacity. There's been a lot of care issues there. Each year we're on joint finance. Senator Dave Lawson, Senator Eric Buxton, and I are holding their feet to the fire. Why do you still have a wing that's closed? We put money in to have a new dental suite. Why is it not being utilized to capacity for all veterans, not just those in the veteran home? And all of it comes back to, and I'm going to circle around, what's the issue? The issue is we need our own veteran service cabinet level agency. So right now, veteran services are under the Secretary of State, just another thing in that list that they have to administer. I think we need our own separate veteran services so they could focus on whole approach to veterans, from helping them to apply to get their benefits. It's staggering when you think we're not applying for federal money that could come back to Delaware for veterans. And I've been told it's millions that Delaware is leaving in Washington by not focusing and asking for the money for our veterans. So those are the things that I hope to work on. And we had started a piece of legislation when I was in the legislature to develop our own agency, and, special cabinet level, and having a person appointed by the governor, and then they would have a staff. And that's my desire for veterans. And, a final thing, a conversation on that is we have the Veterans Court, and then we have veterans that are also inmates and incarcerated. And we need to make sure that we have a plan, because their situation, the reason they're incarcerated might be from PTSD or something else that was because they are a veteran. And so I hope to work. I've been talking some with Joseph Walls and then some retired veteran court judges to see what can we do for better treatment of our vets.
Yeah, and Commander Little, he's with that mental health issue with that vets, and very adamant about that, and making sure that really comes out, and we preach it all the time that it has to get better and stuff. We have 70,000 veterans in Delaware.
Yeah, and a lot of minority men and women veterans as well. And I have a friend that lives near Dover that retired, and he said he had an encounter one time with law enforcement, and it was a flashback to him from a situation he had in the military. And it's like nobody was understanding that where he had been and how this flashback, this post-traumatic stress affected his response to the situation. And I think that's why it's important that we have a Veterans Court, and that we realize that there's some underlying issues. Sometimes, it's hard to come. I was at a conference and they said, imagine this, you enlist, most young, they enlist when they're 18 to 19 years old. They go right from living at home to being in the military. And so they go from being told at home what they're going to do to the military, which tells them when they're going to eat, sleep, wake, when they're going to the doctor, where they're going. And they never apply for a job. They never go through interview process. And all of a sudden they're released. You're released from duty, and there's no really preparation for that. I will call it a type of reentry into regular, or for, you come back from war, you need some time, to adjust, or you might not even be war. It might be some of these assignments, and all of a sudden you're expected to be a civilian. And it's quite, I can imagine, I'm not one, of course, but I can sense that it's quite a change.
Yeah, it is. It is transformation, coming from civilian life into military life and stuff. If you had to think of something, another big topic that's huge that probably haven't been really addressed in this thing for Delaware, what would that be?
I think another thing, two other things, and I'll hit on the one since we're sort of leading down there when we talk about, the criminal justice and the court system, and that's the need to improve the recidivism rate in Delaware. If you were to walk in, and I have, and it's a very, for me, it's a very surreal when I walk into James Vaughn and I have to turn everything over. Phone, every personal possession, and I walk behind one door and it clicks, and then I go behind another door, it clicks, and then I go behind another one, and I'm surrounded by razor, fencing and everything else. It's quite a different feeling. And I think that for many years the governors have appointed folks to come in and take over corrections, and they appoint retired state troopers, who it's a different philosophy to go from law enforcement into corrections. And I think we need to change the mindset a little bit, that what's the purpose of corrections? Yes, it's corrective. It should be accountability for something they did. But at the same time, it's supposed to be for rehabilitation and restoration. And I just think that we're not doing a great job. And that's why we see we don't prepare somebody, like we said about the military, we're not preparing them to re-enter society. So they come out of incarceration with no job skills. They've been inside in a controlled environment for a while. It's so many factors there. And I think that, to me, when you enter a correctional facility, they should begin planning day one your re-entry. If you were 5-year sentence, 10-year sentence, life, which is a 25. There should be a plan, and you should be following that plan while you're incarcerated so that you and engage with the family. So what's the plan here? We're going to be released. We don't have that, and they're reoffending. They'll either fall back into an old habit or an old pattern. And if we look at what's problematic in our communities, which aren't safe, I mean, last week in Laurel, you can see the pictures online. 2 young men, broad daylight, shooting 2 other young men. So we have got to break a cycle. And that cycle means prevention at an early age and intervention. Because our kids, and particularly in the city, for you city listeners, I don't have to tell you that a lot of the crimes in your city are, they're done by 11 to 15-year-olds, where groups have gotten in, groups and gangs have brought them in because they know not much is going to happen to you. And then I heard a 16-year-old saying when he went to the judge the second time and he was a little over 16, they said, "Welcome to the big leagues," because they said, "Well, they didn't do this before." Well, you were you were 14 before, you're 16 now. It's going to be a little bit different. But I think we need to break that cycle somehow and start early with prevention and then intervention. And by the way, you're fortunate in Dover now. You now have the group violence intervention has an office in Dover. They're a phenomenal team. I've met with them. They've done good work in Wilmington, and we need them statewide to stop the cycle. But then we really have to focus on those incarcerated, on giving them skills. And so when they return, they have a better chance of success.
Yeah.
Not read.
And somebody's probably out there saying, "We don't have money to do that. So how are we going to really do that?" You have to make that a priority. And I have said to a couple of the commissioners who've come in to run corrections, if you don't ask, you don't get. And we need to make it very specific. The cost of crime in our communities, the way it hurts our businesses. I mean, look at CVS, Rite Aid, and Walgreens are all talking about closing pharmacies. Well, one of the reasons is they're losing money, and they're losing money because of shoplifting. We're all paying for that. We're all paying because the prices that they're losing through shrinkage or theft, they're increasing the other prices so they can recoup that loss. You and I and everybody else are paying for these crimes. We're paying for the victims. I mean, I always want to put the victims and survivors. Let's remember them because they're going to live a lifetime with whatever happened, or they're going to live a life without a loved one. So I think it's where you want to invest your money. Your creative financing. Help me find a way to reinvest that money. Right. And how we can save.
Right.
And that's so important, that, when we say we don't have the money, we have the money. We have to look how we're using the money to get to that next step, to get it going. And just, in our prison systems, what do you think about just probably schooling our inmates for those that don't have high school diplomas or a trade or something like that?
And see, when you enter, now technically, because I asked this question a few years ago, it's probably been 9 or 10 years ago, I went to a board of parole hearing and they don't have many of those because after truth in sentencing, we don't have that many left that are really what they call parole eligible. And it was disturbing to me because this one gentleman was in his late 60s. And one of the reasons he hadn't been able to be released was he had not been able to get his GED. Well, there was a psychiatrist's note on there that said he lacked the capacity to get a GED. He was never going to get a GED. And I thought, is that a reason to keep a person, incarcerated at this age? He has some other issues where he had no family, and they said he had been in there so long that his chances of survival with no family or no place where he was going in a much changed world. And I thought, so we've had him institutionalized so long that you're saying he can't live outside of this institution, but should there be another option for him rather than incarceration? And so I did try and run a piece of legislation that would say on any new inmate that they would see if they needed an individual education plan and IEP that would say they can't learn at this level, so let's not hold them accountable for something. And they told me that they were already making those changes in policy, that I didn't need the legislation. But I think we need to be mindful that there's, just like out on the street, there's a lot of variety to the type of inmates we see, some with college degrees, some without, but everybody could have that plan on, within the first week about here's where you are, where do you want to be, give them a site for vision yourself. Where do you want to be? Where would you ideally, and what's it going to take to get you there? Because remember this, for every inmate, they have a victim at home, particularly, for our Black men. Most of them have families at home. Those families are victims of whatever their parents did, because they've lost that income, they've lost support system, they've lost something else. And so in many cases, we tend to forget the numerous victims that are created by one crime.
Yeah, and that's important to see that happen and stuff. And I think education is a key to getting that help and the need they have. But I'm gonna hit you with a long one now. This transportation system, I was born in New York, and I'm used to getting on the bus and traveling. Yeah. I mean, how do we improve that? I mean, it's so hard to get downstate, upstate, and stuff like that.
Well, can I ask you a question? So how come if I get on the train in Wilmington and I say I'm going to Connecticut, the price is cheaper than if I say I'm going to New York? I can get off the train in New York. Technically, I could. I watch people do that, and I'm like, hey, this doesn't make sense. Am I right?
Right.
But I think, and yesterday I had a conversation. One of the questions was about transportation. And if you're in the city of Wilmington, you can pick up a bus stop pretty easily. You get to Kent County, Sussex County. You're going to stand along a roadside in a ditch where there's a sign. It can rain, it can sleet, it can whatever. And when the bus comes, it, depending on where you're going, it takes a long time to get there. But let me contrast that for you. If you come to Sussex County and you want to get to the beach for a day for fun and recreation, you can stop at the transit center and get taken right downtown very easily and very inexpensively. But if I want to get from Georgetown to work at the beach, the routes, it's different. And so a few years ago, when we were really at the height of the opioid explosion, I had a center in my district that was seeing between 500 and 600 patients a day. And one of the challenges they had was they had to have somebody take them and pick them up because transportation was a real problem. And then the town started complaining that, these addicts are hanging out on the street. And so I called DelDOT and I said, well, they weren't, because they're in for treatment. So, they have a substance abuse problem, but they're in for treatment to get well. That's why they're in that center. So I called DelDOT. My connection there was Jen Cohen, and she was always, as a transportation secretary, I said, here's the problem. And I always loved it because she'd say, I'm on it. I got it. I'm on it. And so we developed a special route from the high need area to where the center was located. We got some specific pickup and drop offs that they were able to do. So I know they have the ability, if we bring it to their attention, to do certain things. In Georgetown and in part of Western Sussex, they would stop bus service at 9:30 on a Friday. So imagine that you work in a restaurant or a hotel or some other places that don't close until 2 a.m. So you have a bus to take. You have a bus that'll get you to work after a while. You have no way to get home. So we worked on making that change too. Sometimes, Johnny, it's just looking at a situation, asking the right questions. Transportation is unfair to some of our disabled workers. And I'll give you an example. I have 2 young adults in my area that love to work. They have special needs but they love to work. And one of them has a wheelchair and needs assistance. They don't live on a fixed route. They're rural Sussex County. So they have to call the schedule for the bus to pick them up and take them to work. And there might be others that they schedule on that route, but they have to pay for that. And in some cases, getting to and from work in the day is an hour's worth of pay. And I think that there needs to be a voucher system for our special needs and disabled that must take a special bus. There's no bus route. God bless them. They want to work. They have a strong work. And we need to recognize that and provide them with some kind of voucher or assistance to get back and forth. The third big thing in transportation is our senior population. You know, Delaware, come and retire to Delaware. Everybody retire here. But when you get so that you can't drive, it becomes very hard and very expensive to get to doctor's appointments, to get to shopping, to get to other things. And serving on the CHEER board, CHEER has, you know, transportation services. But once again, they're a nonprofit. And sometimes their funding is years behind what the cost. I mean, we're at $3 and something a gallon for gasoline, and they might be for $2 an hour for gas. So you're the finance guy. You're going to have to figure that out. But those are some of the issues of transportation. If you don't have a car or you can't drive, you're really at a loss in Delaware, particularly below the canal.
Right. And we see that we still have, you know, we still like to eat at fast food restaurants and eat out. And we don't have those people because, you know, that's leading to the topic of making sure we can employ those folks that we like at the restaurant and that we can still go out to eat, you know, because restaurants lose business for that. And another thing is not the transportation, but what about the affordable housing in that area, in those areas?
Right. And, you know, it's expensive when you, and here's a fine example. So housing is a little bit easier to find and less expensive in western part of Sussex County. So, you know, Greenwood, Bridgeville, Laurel, Seaford, Delmar, you might find a rental easier. But then you've got to drive all the way over, in most cases, to the east where the jobs are. The jobs are at the outlets. The jobs are at the restaurants. The jobs are at the industrial park. That's where more of the jobs are. So you're spending time and money to get from east to west. And if you're traveling, for instance, in Sussex County, you know, you better allow an extra time to get from east to west in the morning. Getting from west to east, it's traffic will be backed up for a long way. It takes a long time. And that's what we need to talk. When we talk about workforce housing, we mean housing that is within the wages, the livable wages, closer to where a person works. So, you know, we even have doctors coming and nurses that will come into Lewis, and they can't afford or they can't find a rental because they're so expensive.
Wow.
Yeah.
And stuff and that's so important down there. Because what do we think in Sussex County is? I mean, the average rent cost is it just overwhelming? Or
a one bedroom, and I've even seen people, and this is where we have to allow people the ability to make income too. Let's say that you have a garage and you say, you know what, I'll convert my garage to an apartment, be extra income for me. I like creative financing, right? So I'll do an apartment, or maybe I'll rent a room. We need to make it easier for the property owner to be able to do that. In some areas, there, you know, ordinances or whatever prohibit that. But we need to think of solutions they've had in other places to address some of the housing concerns. I used to joke with my son, remember that Taco Bell commercial, good to go, good to go? And I was like, good to go. But really now it's hard. There's nowhere to go, you know? And he's gone, he's married, he's gone. That's good. Yeah. I'm sorry, I just have to have my sense of humor. But it's it is difficult when you educate a child and they want to be independent and they can't be because they can't find a place, or you have someone that has needs to right size or downsize, or they've had a situation in their life and they've lost their housing. to find that is really hard. I think it's just as hard in Dover, and it's hard statewide. We just do not have enough units for workforce, for people that are making, that are working and trying to save. And you're paying more in rent than you would probably pay in a mortgage. If you could save it to get the deposit for your mortgage, you're talking now, aren't I?
Yes, and yes, indeed, yes, indeed. And you had me leaning to something because we're looking at our foreclosure rate probably increasing during this time, and that's one of my big pet peeves of what we talk about, and we need to make the housing affordable for our frontline workers and for our child care, our teachers and stuff like that because of the salaries.
Well, when I think I mentioned to you the other day, are you seeing an increase in foreclosures? Because when not long after I was elected, we were in the middle of the economic tsunami, if you'll recall, where there were a lot of foreclosures. And I worked with then Attorney General Beau Biden. I said, there needs to be a mediation process because some of these banks are just going much too quickly. And in Delaware, we're lucky that, it's the courts that determine the foreclosure process. The bank just can't automatically. There is a process to that. But I think what we're seeing now is a symptom, again, high interest rates, those adjustable mortgages, the interest rates are high. And then you put on that the cost of living. Who would have ever thought 3 or 4 years ago we would see this kind of, inflation and supply chain disruption? And some of that comes from Washington. It comes from decisions there. And in Delaware, there's been decisions here that also affect, the economic recovery. And I don't think a lot of people see that. They want, you slowly get adjusted to paying more and paying more and paying more. And then people are borrowing to, buy groceries. Or you go into a grocery store and it's not the dollar store anymore. It's the $1.25 store.
Store. That's right.
I mean, let's be real. And that's not 8% inflation, is it? That's a lot more than 8% when you add a quarter onto that dollar. But everything's been like that. So we're feeling that squeeze. And in Delaware, our small businesses are really hard hit. I mean, you'll look and you'll see a restaurant closing, another restaurant closing, or, some of it's they can't find workers. Some of it, they're just not, by the time they pay their high energy costs, by the time they pay some of these other new required benefits that they have to carry, small business can't afford that. And so we're losing small business. And then we have too much red tape for somebody that wants to start a small business or access to capital, particularly in the minority community. It's harder to get loans to start a business than I think. I mean, that's what I've been told, and to find, to find lenders. And so it's this cycle we're caught in. And I just think we need some changes, real change, to change these systemic problems that are in Delaware.
Yeah, and man, it's so important to reach out and really see what's happening in the community and see how we're going to make this change. I mean, we got a big date coming up. We're looking at www.ruthfordelaware.com. If somebody wants to make a donation, I'm asking. Go ahead and support it, because we see that Ms. King, she has some valuable information. She has some valuable topics that we don't address, and ones that's dear to me is that affordable home housing, and understanding that and making sure that we don't have this homelessness, and people on the street, which cause more robbery. I mean, it cause more elements that happen out there, and it's unsafe for us, for the people that's working and everything else for that. And if you had something, Ms. King, that the people probably don't understand how that happened, they can say, we can just make money for it. Isabel said the price of rent has increased and small business is having a tough time. Okay. That is so true in this economy for here, because we're trying to maintain. Do you think rent control would help that, Ms. King? What is your thought on that?
I don't. I think it sounds good, but I think those are there's unintended consequences. And let me give an example. 2 years ago, I think it's been about 2 years ago now, maybe a year and a half, there was a piece of legislation that said that anytime a tenant was facing eviction, they would have free legal counsel available to them. And I said, well, this sounds good. The problem is ultimately the tenants are going to wind up paying for that, because the landlord is going to have an attorney when they go to court. Because there's a lot of small landlords. For many years, my dad had some rental properties, and then my husband and I had one or two. And to be honest, Johnny, we would always, there's a lot of small landlords, not huge complexes. When somebody was having a rough time, they say, hey, I'm having it. Well, maybe next month, or give me this, or do whatever you can. A lot of times landlords do that, and they let you go. And then it comes to a point when it's more of a habit and they're not trying. Most of the, anytime somebody tries to get an eviction, they go to the court, and because only the courts can evict in Delaware. Remember that, only a court can evict you. And probably 8 times out of 10, it's for non-payment of rent. It's not for any other reason except they're not paying the rent. And we would have people that you might get a judgment when we're talking 1 or 2 years, no rent. We would have to pay insurance and other things on that building to keep it so that they could live in it, even though they weren't paying rent. Those are responsibilities. And I said, I'm afraid what's going to happen if you require them to have a lawyer paid for, then rent's going to increase. And what did people start saying about 3 or 4 months after that bill passed? Their rents were going up. So a lot of people are going to pay more in rents in order to cover that. That was an unintended consequence. My fear with rent control is, particularly in the city where a lot of companies, investment companies, have come in and bought up a lot of the apartments. You won't get the responsive landlord that's, when you call, you've got this going on or that going on. They won't be doing a lot of maintenance. It'll sort of be slowed when there's rent control. And because remember that rent control was saying you can't increase the rent. We're in the process, you guys in Kent County, I don't have to tell you about reassessment if you own property. You probably got a much different bill for property tax this year. They went up. They went up. So if you've got rent control, how can that landlord get compensated for that increased insurance cost, increase in taxes that they have to pay on the property, and maybe even some, they're going out for a loan to do repairs. So all of these things come. I want to have quality housing stock at a reasonable price. And I think what we do is we talk to those stakeholders. What can we do to address rent issues? How can we compensate or incentivize you to keep rents low, rather than saying rent control? I think, once again, creative financing. I'm afraid, I'm looking at the last housing assessment that was released last year, and we lost over 7,000 rental properties in the state.
Wow.
And so what happened to them? And that's part of a waiting list that's waiting for housing right now. So you lost 7,000 units, and a lot of those in manufactured housing. And we did a lot of changes in the law in manufactured housing. So I think that there is a relationship, there's a consequence for some legislation. And we need to look at a better approach rather than just saying rent control. I think that's a jump. I think we need to do something, but I'm not sure that rent control is the answer.
Yeah.
Did I say too much?
No. And that's good to know for it and stuff, because it has to be some type of balance that, folks are looking for regardless, they either lost their job or something. But in Delaware, they had a program some months ago where they would help them catch up on the rent and stuff.
There was a rental assistance program, which I had really advocated for. And then there was this mortgage assistance program. And then there was also a manufactured home program for those who had trouble with rent. And there were certain concessions that they could be forgiven of certain things if they met certain qualifications. Unfortunately for me, when I've tried to help a few people that are right on the margin, it's like they make $34 too much. One lady, I'll never forget, her adult disabled son lived with her. Now, he couldn't live independently. He lived with her, and she was in her late 70s, and they counted his disability income toward her income and said the household income was too much, $34 too much to get any kind of assistance program. And, this lady can't go out and earn money, not at her age and her
Right.
conditions and stuff. That's when the system just needs adjustment. It needs a rebalance.
Yeah, for it and stuff. And those type of parameters right there you put on it really can damage people from really wanting to figure some things out, and it cause a lot of
Well,
problems.
technically, she would have been better off if she said, "State, take my adult son and be
Yeah.
responsible for him. I can't do it anymore." It would have cost them far more to take care of him than the 34
Mm.
than any subsidy or assistance to her that they could give. It just seems like, Johnny, it just seems like there's too many silos sometimes in the way our agencies run. DHSS does this, but it doesn't talk with the housing authority. There's a disconnect. Then you've got children and youth services, which provides certain services for children, but things aren't interconnected. And so people fall
Hmm.
through, trying to navigate that. It's hard for me to try and navigate and get a person help. And I don't know how some people they just can't do it on their own.
Right, for
Not
it
when
and
they're
stuff.
already facing so many challenges.
Wow. And do you think that if they think an exemption for the salary base, that would have changed the whole parameters of people in
Hmm.
assistance and being able to live a little bit better?
Right. The same thing like that. And I think there needs to be a graduated system so that we don't punish people that are trying to come off some support or some services. That if you make this much, so if I'm working for $13 an hour and I get an offer of a promotion or full-time work and I can go to 18 or 20. And if I take that promotion, I will lose these benefits. So many people will say, well, I need the child care, the purchase of care, I need TANF, I need these other benefits. So I'll just stay where I am and keep these benefits rather than advancing in my career. I think that's a terrible place to put people. I think that there needs to be some type of gradual leverage where they can, not be penalized for making advancements in their earnings. I think
Yeah.
I think some other states have done that kind of a leverage thing where, we're not going to take you off all these benefits and pull this rug out from under you because you're making $3 or $4 an hour more than you ever thought you could.
Right, for it and stuff, and govern it, because it's hard out here. The economy changing, stuff's going up. We're trying to make it, and just a basic living, especially our senior citizens. They're fighting sometimes for
Mhm.
medicine, or paying that light bill, or paying a
Mhm.
rent increase, or stuff like that, which, we need to have some type of stabilization for our seniors as well out here
Right.
in this economy.
Yeah, it's bad enough on the rest of us when we think, okay, somebody in the family's got to go out and get another job to make ends meet because of inflation. Well, when you've got a senior that can't do that, they physically, they can't go to work anymore, either
Right.
age or this, that, or the other. We heard in the state when I was working on some state benefits and other stuff and trying to see about increasing the pension for state workers, and the decision was, do you increase their health care cost, or do you give them less than a 1% pension increase? Well, the health care cost is a much better benefit for that senior than that 1%. I mean, because it just is. You understand finances, it just
Mhm.
is. But those are the kind of hard decisions. But when you have pensioners, that have been, they're in their 90s and they're trying to live off the pension they had 20
Mhm.
years ago, very, very hard with energy costs, gasoline prices. I mean, it just skyrocketed in the last 3 years. So
Mhm.
got to
Tell
bring
me
it
this:
back.
small businesses. What's going to happen to our small businesses in this whole
I
situation?
I hope with our new governor, and I've heard Mike Ramone, who is one of my running mates, talk about it, that we need to focus on small business development, support small business, because the small businesses in Delaware are more and greater than one or two of the large businesses. And so we need to get rid of some of the regulatory red tape that it takes to start a business or grow a business. We really need to be mindful and quit layering so many taxes or fees or other requirements. There was a small child care business in Georgetown, Little Faces. And
Mm-hmm.
last year they were told they had to close because Del Doc was taking the building. I don't think Chrissy will mind me sharing that she had taken out a significant small business loan to fit everything out in this building that she was leasing for her child care practice. And
Wow.
the owner had sort of said, "Oh, you'll be able to expand." And Del Doc comes in and says, "You have to be out in 3 months. We're taking the bill. We bought the property. We're taking the building." So her over $100,000 investment that she had a loan for, and she had to move. She had to find another location. And during that move, first of all, it was, you don't have adequate parking spaces. Well, used to be a doctor's office. There were a lot of parking spaces. She has 5 or 6 employees all at one time. She has a lot of little children that are dropped off, but she had less than 10 employees, and they were telling her she needed double the parking. Then when you get in the building, they told her she had to have a fire suppressant system that was, it was way over 25, close to 50, between 25 and $50,000. So one of my jobs is to go to battle for my folks and fight and see what we
Right.
can do and how we can reduce that down. And I visited her twice since she's been in her new facility. She's been able to add more children, because as you can imagine, daycare is hard to find.
Right.
And anyway, but there were so many roadblocks for this small business. I mean, it was this
Mm.
inspection and that inspection and this engineering fee and that engineering fee, and everything was time and money, but it was an emotional drain for a
Mhm.
a small business owner, a woman-owned business, minority-owned business, trying to provide daycare to a needed community and trying to just keep her business going. And I don't know if I was fighting for her with her, as well as the development director from the Sussex County. But what do these small businesses do that don't have that champion? And so we need to find a better system. We need to come back to having Delaware's own economic development office for developing our business, for developing tourism, for developing small business and helping those roadblocks. We lost that well, maybe about 8 years ago when Governor Carney came in. He wanted to do away with that office and do something different. And unfortunately, that's focused on big business
Mhm.
when really small business is the backbone of Delaware.
Right. Right. For it and stuff.
You
Miss
know
King,
it.
you're right. Miss King, man, I am so excited. I want to thank you so much for coming on. For our listening audience that came on, and they probably, man, you probably fill their mind with some good transition that they should think about when this election coming up on November 5th. So everybody, y'all get ready to vote for it. But Miss King have outlined some wonderful topics here of things that we need to change, things that we have to improve so Delaware can grow and for us to understand. And I want her to give her last little spill about anything that she can tell our listening audience for this election period.
Well, I want to thank them for wanting to be engaged on a lot of the different issues. I think you can see I have a heart for many things, without
Mhm.
being a public servant, and I'm pretty well versed in a lot of stuff.
Right.
I think what you need to know is what you saw tonight is what you would see any given day with me. I'm the same yesterday
Right.
as I am today, and
Yes.
I'm going to be that tomorrow. But you do have a choice, and I think that if you want to see some really significant changes in the way things are going, if you want that person who, above all, works for the people. I hope you understood, for everything that come through, everything I've done is focused on improving lives and livelihoods of the people, growing business so it can grow our economy, and that will lift all boats up. And so, really having a good idea of things. I'm not missing things. I'm not looking in the mirror. I'm looking out the window, see what's going on in our community, how we can improve it. And I hope you'll see that when you look at me, and that you'll vote for me to be your lieutenant governor on November 5th. And if you want, you can go in and vote early starting Friday.
Starting Friday, definitely vote. Yes, Isabel, definitely vote
Thank
for it
you.
and everything. Folks, this was Creative Finance with JB with Miss King. We had an excellent opportunity tonight. Hear it. Election November 5th. Don't miss out. We will see you next week. And thanks again for tuning in. You have a
Thank
great
you.
week. Thanks.